Hello, everyone. I hope you're all happy and healthy along with your respected families where we're located on this God's green earth. Welcome to today's episode of Real Talks with Amini, and I'm honored to have Ambassador Ashraf Haidari once again on the show to speak with him on the situation in Afghanistan, the situation around the region, as well as the U.S. Policy towards Afghanistan. A lot has happened since we spoke last time. Ambassador, welcome on the show once again. Glad to have you. Thank you for your time. You're now founder and president of Displaced International. So maybe we can start by having your description of what is Displaced International, what are the focus areas, and why did you create this initiative? And then we can move into the situation in the region of how the neighboring countries are treating Afghans. What are the reactions of Afghan elite to the situation, as well as what are some of the policy initiatives by the neighboring countries, particularly the recent announcement by Russia that they're recognizing Taliban. What are the implications of that, as well as the U.S. response, and what is your prediction of what the U.S. policy would be towards Afghanistan, and what do you recommend for the U.S. policymakers to adopt policies? So maybe we can start by having you describe what is Displaced International.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your distinguished show, and thanks also for your personal commitment to furthering the many causes of suffering Afghans inside in the region and around the world. I really appreciate your personal leadership and commitment to Afghanistan and Afghanistan's secure future, free from terrorism, criminality, poverty, and so forth.
Thank you.
Displaced International is a direct response to the increased conflicts of geopolitics, primarily responsible for displacing over 120 million people, including Afghans. We are different in the sense that we are led, managed, and operated by displaced. In other words, it's an organization, it's a global initiative for the displaced, by the displaced. And we work alongside other organizations advancing the many causes of displaced populations across the world, but we bring the perspective and the lived experiences of displaced people, including refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced people, stateless people, immigrants, and migrants. So we are all comprehensive and inclusive of anyone displaced for either human security reasons or for protective reasons, which I pointed out. We have four programs, including advocacy, which is quite active, emergency assistance, resettlement, or we call it also integration and self-reliance, and as well as complementary pathways, providing once the resources are available, services and family unification, private sponsorship group, providing scholarships for qualified refugee displaced students in the source countries, as well as in the first, second countries of asylum, and in the regions overseas and in Americas, and so forth. We are currently voluntary, about around 50 people, led by a founder and president. We have a board that is international, consisting of Africans, Europeans, and Asians, and as well as a global advisory council of people with either immigrant displacement background or people committed to the cause, including eminent scholars, private sector leaders, humanitarian leaders with on-the-ground experience and work experience as well. And then we have the Displaced Fellows program consisting of some 30 fellows, including senior with masters and PhDs, and as well as junior fellows with at least undergrad with a lived experience, either in the source countries or first, second countries of asylum. So our hope is really to add that perspective, to be at the table of decision making in policymaking when it comes to forced displacement and forced migration, because we have realized that unfortunately, as much as these different international humanitarian organizations do their best and we work with them, we support them, the voices of the displaced unfortunately do not make it across major policy makers and the major powers across the world. And so in addition, we also have a flagship publication as part of our advocacy program called Displaced Voices. And here, we not only invite external writers with either commitment or experience or lived experience, but also we encourage our fellows to write and publish their shorter pieces to longer reports to discuss their perspective on the root causes of forced displacement and migration, what to do about them, in addition to just providing relief and recovery assistance and sometimes sustainable development. But at the heart of the problem, as I pointed out, is conflicts of geopolitics and how to address those through conflict resolution, peace building, and peacemaking.
Wow, that's amazing. There's so many programs, so many initiatives that you're leading. It's very important. All of the areas that mentioned, all of the issues and all of the key aspects, and you have successfully have developed it. That is a testimony to your leadership in building a team and having a vision and identifying a critical area of humanity to address that is affecting millions of people across the world. So thank you for that, and thank you to all the people who are supporting you, who are with you, and are participating. All of you voluntarily dedicating your time and energy on this important issue. So thank you very much.
You're
If
most
we can.
welcome, and I should point out that as much as it's voluntary, if you just go on our social media pages and website, you would see that we are updated many times a day. And if you compare it with some of these leading organizations with a lot of resources, you would see that we have a stronger voice. We are a lot more active, and the substance of what we give to our readers is also a lot deeper because it mixes theory, a practice, and as well as lived experience to really demonstrate what the problem is at the end of the day and how to address it. The challenge of immigration facing major countries here in North America as well as and Europe, and how to address those challenges at the source, but also I think refugees or immigrants that have arrived in these countries, how to help them integrate and assimilate in ways that is win-win as opposed to deporting them and unfortunately ending their hope of settling down as promised by the American dream.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue to get into. First, maybe we can focus on the region of Afghanistan and the neighborhood. We are witnessing a reverse displacement type situation where Afghans were displaced forcibly due to the circumstances in Afghanistan to Iran and Pakistan and other regional countries, or forcibly being deported back. But what do you think is driving? What are the motivating factors in these countries, particularly if you can focus on Iran and Pakistan? The two important neighbors where there are large segments of Afghans in those two countries. Why are they forcing Afghans to go back?
Well, first of all, it's very important that over the past now, soon 5 decades, the two countries, unfortunately, Pakistan and Iran, have unfortunately been involved in the geopolitical games, favoring their national security interests, and in the process that have contributed to the forced migration and displacement of millions of Afghans. In the 80s, 6 million Afghans were displaced during the last decade of the Cold War, and then in the 1990s. Unfortunately, the regional players, especially Iran and Pakistan, supported factional infighting and proxies that further displaced millions of Afghans. And then throughout the 20-year period between 2001 and 2021, as well as just the international community tried to help stabilize Afghanistan, but the two countries relentlessly supported the Taliban's terror campaign, continuing to displace forcibly Afghans to seek a secure future in the neighboring states and beyond. And then since, of course, the fall of the Taliban in 2021, which the two countries sponsored, supported, and brought about into power to control Afghanistan, more Afghans have fled. So what I'm saying in essence that these two countries are directly responsible for large-scale displacement and migration from Afghanistan. And unfortunately, and instead of treating this as a humanitarian crisis, which they brought about, they're politicizing it, either domestically or for geopolitical reasons. And as we see over the past now week or so, Afghans are victims of Iran's deportations campaign in the context of this 12-day war with Israel now scapegoating Afghans. Although one of their key members of parliament just came out yesterday with the vote before yesterday. This clip was out and it's gone viral to say that there's not a single Afghan among those who've been arrested for espionage, favoring the country's enemies. And that's because Afghans, unfortunately, were driven out to seek a basic, normal, peaceful life in the neighboring countries and return home voluntarily when the conditions, have changed enough for their sustainable, safe, voluntary, orderly return as per the provisions of international law under the 1951 Geneva Convention, related protocols of 1967, and as well as also agreements that Afghanistan signed with Iran and Pakistan, tripartite agreements, which sometimes I used to be involved before the fall in 2021. So unfortunately, both countries, as we speak, are violating the laws, violating the agreements, violating good neighborliness, violating the basic principles of Islam. Non-lethal law is actually rooted in Islam. We know that Prophet Muhammad migrated from one city to another city to seek protection. And that is, tradition of Prophet Muhammad calling upon, the Muslim world, the Muslim Ummah, to receive, to embrace refugees, to, give them a home until they were able to go back safely. Unfortunately, both the Islamic states of Pakistan and Iran are in violation of that tradition of Islam, of, their commitments under the convention, which I pointed out. And it is tragic and it needs to stop as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the hypocrisy of adhering or indicating as if they are adhering to a set of principles, religious principles, but in practice being in complete violation. It speaks volume about their hypocrisy of the regimes, the nature of the regimes, even though they have the Islamic brand on top of it, their behavior is not representative of that. But contrary to the behavior of the Islamic world towards their own citizens, it's not just related to Afghanistan or Iran and Pakistan, but other neighboring countries, other Arab countries are also having similar attitude and approaches of being closed doors in front of the refugees and migrants and not allowing anybody to be displaced and not giving refuge to anybody. But compared to them, unlike them, the Western world has been much more receptive to migrants and migration overall, Europe and America. What is your assessment of the ongoing internal political debates and discussions in these countries? Do you think what is the trajectory? Which direction are we moving in these societies?
I completely agree with your assessment that in terms of international burden sharing of refugees for different reasons, now, people are primarily driven by a combination of conflicts, climate change impacts, and disasters, and as well as the resulting poverty, lack of opportunity, especially for youth. And many of these countries, less developed and least developed countries, are suffering from youth bulge. There are more people that, fragile estates, or in some cases, failed estates like in Afghanistan that prevail, are unable to provide those sustainable jobs for the youth. And as a result, they're fleeing from a combination of those challenges, which I pointed out. In terms of burdening, sharing this burden, the countries, especially the Gulf states, despite the fact that they have abundant resources to take refugees under their own laws and as well as international laws, they have refused to do so. And that's why, as a result, most youth who flee Afghanistan or African states, whether by boat or overland or a combination of different routes that they take as a very risky trek. And they try to make it to Western Europe as well as North America or Australia and other countries simply because the rule of law still prevails on those countries. Those countries still abide by their treaty obligations under the convention that I pointed out in 1951. They do still take asylum on a case-by-case basis, determining whether they meet the definition. And in some cases, they even, are more flexible because the conditions since the 60s and then 50s have changed. As a result, people are now increasingly fleeing generalized violence, that they're not specifically targeted, but they're fleeing regimes such as the Taliban, totalitarian, oppressive, repressive, and enforcing gender apartheid. Although a woman may not be necessarily uh, mistreated by the Taliban in her home and she can be saved, but the fact that she lacks access to basic human rights in terms of primary education, secondary education, tertiary education, and ultimately a job to stand on her own and provide for her family are reasons that drive these people regionally and globally. And here the response and sharing burden by countries with resources, especially those in the Middle East, countries like Japan even, or South Korea and other countries, similar countries with resources have refused to share the burden with the rest of the international community, especially Western developed countries.
Right. And what do you think, if you go back to the region, what do you think what is your assessment of the reaction of the Afghan elite, those who claim to the leadership roles of the society of the people, towards the forceful deportation of Afghans from Iran and Pakistan? What is your assessment from their statements so far?
A total failure, a total fiasco, a tragedy. It's unfortunate that they are displaced themselves. They have fled the same conditions which those millions of Afghans, ordinary Afghans, have fled, and that they're now residing in Iran and Pakistan, but unfortunately being deported. Not a single one of them has come out on a consistent basis and at least, if not daily, weekly, advocating for the protection of these refugees, and yet they claim leadership. And I refer to all of them from all major ethnic groups, whether Pashtun, whether Tajik, whether Hazara, whether Uzbek, sitting in safe countries in the region and outside, and yet sufficing to release maybe a tweet or maybe less than half a page of a statement that doesn't say anything, doesn't even dare to call on Iran to halt this a collective punishment, which is a crime against humanity under international law. They don't have the courage. So Afghans wonder whether these people are on the Iran's payroll or Pakistan's payroll, or whether they have future interests that could be served, and maintaining silence as opposed to speaking up. But when it comes to claiming leadership of Afghanistan, they're first to claim it. If there tomorrow there's an opportunity to talk to the Taliban, a conflict resolution process, they would probably be first to sit around at the table and seek power, unfortunately. And yet they have failed our refugees in a very tragic way. I've called it out almost every single day. And some of them are in some of groups that I write and remind and urge them to speak up. I would tell you that thanks to President Karzai, finally came out just yesterday to issue a basic statement. Better than nothing, but it's unfortunate. Here's, a leader who led Afghanistan for 14 years, and yet he waited for a full week, watching the suffering of refugees forcibly return across the border under blistering sun. It's a desert situation with no food, no water, no shelter, no place to go, because these people were uprooted some of them decades ago. They went to Iran 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They have nothing in Afghanistan. And some of them, they just were forced to abandon their investments, their properties purchased under Iranians' names legally. Others had businesses. Others, they were not paid their wages. Others had probably made some small, large loans to Iranians because people in the process of Afghans are very friendly people, especially when, in a host country. They're resilient, they're enterprising, they work hard, they make money. So they have been forced to abandon everything. It's a collective punishment, which unfortunately Afghanistan's failed leadership, no leadership, weak leadership outside Afghanistan have failed to call out. And this includes from NRF and all these other friends that go around and hold meetings and talk big. But unfortunately, they have failed to show up for our refugees, which is over 1/3 of our population. This is Afghanistan.
Yeah, very unfortunate situation, and it's worth mentioning that it's shameful. It is inhuman. It's a crime against humanity what the neighboring countries are doing by forcing Afghan refugees, those who flee, those who have escaped the Taliban tyranny, the very tyrannical regime that these neighboring countries helped install in Afghanistan with their destructive policies that they had towards the former Afghan Republic and our coalition allies, and now taking all of these Afghans who just want to have a circumstance where their daughters could go to school, and they're taking these girls away from their schools and sending them back to Afghanistan where they do not have any place to go to get educated. It is really inhuman. They need to really look internally whether how far they've become distance from the true essence of humanity, let alone being Muslims or being a neighbor country. I mean, it's inhuman. And of course, thanks to you and a number of citizen advocacy groups and individuals and activists who are now the voices of the Afghans and voices of these disparate Afghans, and indicating their reactions and highlighting the situation, and continuously shedding light on what's going on, while the traditional leaders failed us collectively, unfortunately.
And
But it's
because
also,
they have
the
failed,
people of
because they,
Afghanistan are seeing
yeah,
who are standing up to them, who are helping them, who are being a voice for them, and hopefully that would give us confidence and give you a confidence that in the future the failed leaders will not have any chance to dictate the future of Afghanistan as they have done in the past. They have already failed us, so hopefully they will not have any opportunity in the future to jeopardize any future path that we will have for the country. Please go ahead.
absolutely. Thank you so much for making those additional strong points. And because the leadership is missing, let me talk directly to President Pezeshkian, to his advisor, Dr. Zarif, Ambassador Zarif, and to Ayatollah Khamenei. You have lost the goodwill and solidarity of the Afghan people, 40 million Afghans, with the people of Iran. And that's another strategic failure on top of your failures over the past 3 or 4 weeks by scapegoating a vulnerable, destitute, impoverished community who fled the conditions that you brought about by sponsoring, by supporting a proxy and the Taliban. It is unfortunate. This should not have happened. This should stop. And also to the Iranian diaspora, making daily racist, discriminatory comments. Shame on you. And I'm talking to some of you here in Washington. You know who I am, and I know who you are. Daily advocating, lobbying for the regime which you have fled for the same reasons Afghans have fled the Taliban, taking refuge in Iran. Shame on you.
Yep.
Man up, go back to Iran. Go back to Iran and stop making these comments about Afghans because the conditions that you brought about in your country brought about, forced them to leave Afghanistan. They will not stay in Iran or Pakistan a single day. And they've demonstrated that in the past. Go visit in early 1990s and as well as 2001, 2002. How many millions of Afghans returned voluntarily without any assistance, without any shelter, food, promise of any of these things on their return, just the hope of sustainable peace. Encourage them to return, and they did. They will not stay a single day in your countries if your two countries actually supported a sustainable peace process that allowed them to go back voluntarily.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for
that's
that.
what I encourage the leaderships of the two countries to do.
Thank you very much for that powerful statement. Um, Mr. Ambassador, you are also teaching South Asian studies and Asian affairs overall. You're an expert in the region. Could you tell us about the regional policies towards Afghanistan? We have recently heard about the Russian announcement of their recognition of the Taliban. We know that Russia has been funding the Taliban, and they have been one of the major donors through their intermediaries in Iran and Pakistan for creating the Taliban in the first place as their proxy to get rid of all of the elements who are allied of the U.S. and the West in the first episode of fighting against the Soviet forces and the remnants of them. And also the second time, of course, directly against the U.S. and coalition forces, they've been paying them and also killing Afghan soldiers as well. And they facilitated the situation in a way for the Taliban to take charge. And for the past 4 years, we have been witnessing how they have been lobbying the international community at the UN Security Council and other places for countries to recognize, but nobody did it. So the Russians took the first step. What do you think is happening in the region? Do you think other countries are preparing to recognize the Taliban, or you think this is a unilateral move by Russia and they will continue to stay alone in this, given the fact that the US and Western countries have clearly stated that they will not recognize such an apartheid regime and terrorist regime in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so the problems of Afghanistan are, at the end of the day, regionally rooted. Over the past 5 decades, starting from the Soviet invasion, if you look at Soviets not invaded, I don't think if that would have brought the West to side with Pakistan and along others to then create this Mujahideen factions to bleed the Soviets in Afghanistan, and then that aftermath that followed directly as a result of that. Then again, the regional countries had an opportunity with the departure of the West in the early 1990s to help Afghans put together a government that would be sustainable and ensure sustainable peace, and working with the neighbors as a landlocked country to advance a shared agenda of peace and prosperity. They did not. Instead of doing so, they created or maintained support for their favorite Mujahideen factions to continue, unfortunately, ripping Afghanistan apart and causing, you know, millions of Afghans to flee the country. Over the past 2 decades, we as well saw that the countries of the region, primarily Pakistan and Iran, um, on a daily basis, sponsored, supported, operationalized the Taliban's terror campaign, destabilizing Afghanistan, undermining international efforts. Um, Hundreds of millions of dollars poured into Afghanistan, rebuild Afghanistan, to help develop Afghanistan on a sustainable basis. And the countries in the region knew from, for example, America's past experience, primarily from Iraq, which was the most recent, that US would not part. And as early as 2014, the US had been saying and physically showing that they were departing, that Afghans were taking over, that they were calling every single day on the countries of the region to discontinue destabilizing Afghanistan and to support a results-driven peace process. I recall, and I went in 2017, 2018 to Moscow. My counterpart was Ambassador Koblov, the special envoy of the Russian president, and as well as their deputy foreign minister for political affairs. And over lunch, with the presence of the ambassadors and deputy foreign ministers of the 11 countries surrounding Afghanistan, we had a very long conversation where I told them exactly these words, that the region has historically failed Afghanistan, that the problems are rooted in the region, and that the solutions are rooted in the region. That as we speak today, uh, Afghans ask why India, Russia, and China, three of the big BRICS, so to speak, or the REC, are allowing the institutionalization of extremism, terrorism, criminality in their backyard, which, of course, destabilizes the region, undermines regional stability that, of course, is really undermining their own core national security interests. For example, if China is hoping to ensure the security of its signature project, Belt and Road, that's Pakistan and China economic corridor, then they should help stabilize Afghanistan. If Russia hopes to maintain stability in its backyard across Central Asia, then they shouldn't recognize the Taliban, but they should work regionally within SCO, which is primarily a security cooperation organization, to help stabilize Afghanistan. Or if Iran, which is now a member of SCO, or Pakistan, a member of SCO, daily complaining about security threats emanating from Afghanistan under the Taliban, enabling TTP to target Pakistan frequently. They should all cooperate, collaborate to achieve that end state, an Afghanistan that is stable, that is peaceful, that is democratically operated and run, and is chosen and elected by the Afghan people, because that's who the Afghan people are. It's not something that's superimposed from outside, but Afghanistan is a mountainous country, egalitarian, autonomous nature, and every ethnic group of Afghanistan, much like Switzerland, that's the nature of these mountainous countries, regardless of where they're located, whether in Europe, whether in Asia, whether in Americas. That's who they are, these peoples. So respecting that will of the Afghan people then should help them through a regionally led, sponsored by the United Nations, and partnership with the West, the United States, support a conflict resolution process where the government is legitimized and is inclusive, that represent all Afghans, and then this government is supported to go about addressing the challenges that the Afghan people increasingly face under the Taliban, who are the matter of the problems that face Afghans, and as well the matter of the problems that face the region and the rest of the world, because the Taliban are sheltering over 20 regional and global terrorist networks. Methamphetamine, which is an alternative to
But
other opiates
why
that
do
have
you
on the
think,
sun.
Mr. Ambassador, why are they not doing it? Don't you think that maybe the authoritarian nature of their own regimes is making them to be comfortable with having an authoritarian regime in Afghanistan rather than having a democratic governance as we had in the past 20 years? Or you think they have so much invested in terms of money, finance, and arms and ammunition and training to various levels of the Taliban, that basically Taliban is a proxy of their regimes, particularly Russia, that they're assured of any threats that this regime would have would not be directed at the neighboring countries, as a lot of Western experts predict. Rather, it would be more directed towards the West, as we had in the previous regime. The 9/11 incident happened in the West, in America. Don't you think that probably their investment is not economic related? It is more security related by establishing a terrorist state that could be used as an umbrella to bring all of the terrorists under it and then unleash this terrorism manufacturing factory basically from Afghanistan towards all of the Western countries that they cannot directly challenge their leadership and their ideals. So basically use terrorism.
Well, it's unfortunate. Strategically speaking, they cannot see the forest for the trees. Strategically speaking, especially grand strategy speaking, and they know what I mean, that an island of instability where they pick up their favorite group, rent it, use it against their geopolitical competitor, could be in the region, could be outside the region, is not going to be sustainable, is not going to help ensure their core national security interests on a sustainable basis. Yes, it's favoring certain groups in power, pragmatically speaking, realistically speaking, on the short run. That's understandable, and that's what they're doing. So Russia's recognition of the Taliban, there is no strategic agenda behind it. It is just a pragmatic response to buy influence with the Taliban today. And so is the case with Pakistan. We saw in case of Pakistan pursuing this as a long-term strategy, and yet it is failing today. And who's criticizing the Taliban every single day? This was the mother of the Taliban, the father of the Taliban, hoping that somehow they would secure, a strategic depth by supporting the Taliban. Today, the very Taliban that they thought would secure them strategic depth in Afghanistan are sheltering TTP heading Pakistan every single day. So what lesson Iran should draw from this? What lesson India should draw from this? Because India has completely neglected, abandoned the people of Afghanistan.
What do
The
you think is
same people, the
the
same
The
people.
Indian rationale for engaging the Taliban?
The same thing. Pragmatism, short-sightedness, short-term realism. It's not a strategic. If it were strategic, India would maintain its popularity with the Afghan people, maintain the support of the Afghan people for India. Remember, it was the Afghan people who supported President Karzai in 2011 to sign a strategic partnership agreement with India. That came from the Afghan people. And look how India is responding. And look how India lost the people of Bangladesh. The people of Bangladesh were lost because India was short-sighted, throwing all its support with a regime that was authoritarian, that had taken distance from its people, and subsequently resulted in a situation where people revolted, took over, and replaced the regime. With India, unfortunately or fortunately, losing the people of Bangladesh, and as a result, that the strategic influence that it used to have. So the region is, on the one hand, containing the problems emanating from Afghanistan, and that's impossible to contain. And so the reverse migration that you talked about, ultimately, these people have been forcibly displaced, but Afghans will go back to those countries simply because unless the conditions change, humans always search, regardless of where they are, regardless of history. This has been the case over millennia. Migration is not something new that you and I talk about or these conventions talk about over the past, since the end of the Second World War and all that. It has been there for two basic reasons.
Yeah.
Humans simply leave places to go to places where their life can be better, even, to a certain degree. So the region is unfortunately a failed Afghanistan, and thereby failing themselves and the security of their nations. And the
Yeah.
same goes with the United States.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, we'll get into the
sure.
United States as well. But to stay on the region just briefly, I think It seems as if the countries that you have mentioned, the RIC, Russia, India, and China, the big players in the region, somehow have reached an understanding over the Taliban leadership of the governance in Afghanistan. As you indicated, it is very short-sighted. It is irrational. I think the people who are advising them, that I believe are mostly the Russians, who have the primary remote control of the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan. They have are advising, and based on their advice, these countries are engaging. I think Pakistanis have also done so. They have been helping the Russians in terms of operationalizing the Taliban. That now they're seeing the spillover effect, and also they're seeing they're getting the heat from the Western world in terms of their connection with the Taliban. So we'll see what what the Pakistanis will do. I think there are discussions internally in terms of whether they would go along. There are folks who wish to go along with the regional powers, but there are other actors within Pakistan who understand that the Western world will not accept this arrangement, and they will act against it. And so they would like to be on the Western side, on the democratic side, on the free world side when it comes to Afghanistan. And for these countries in the neighborhood, I think they need to look into the history of Afghanistan to see that any arrangement in Afghanistan, if it did not have the backing of a broad-based of Afghans of all backgrounds, particularly the women of Afghanistan, that governance will not last in Afghanistan. And so the next day, when this arrangement collapses, as you warned, Ambassador, another Bangladesh could be for these countries, where the population will be anti their regimes and anti their establishment, the establishment that supported a group that was terrorizing half of our population directly, but also generally the whole population, and forced millions into migration, and they have been the major cause. So maybe this is a good segue to get into the Western policy towards Afghanistan. So considering the recent statement by the U.S. representative at the United Nations, and also given the fact that there are internal deliberations within the U.S. Entities on what type of policy they could have towards Afghanistan. Clearly, they will not go along with Russians to recognize the Taliban. But what do you think is could be the policy of the U.S.? There are chatters that we hear in terms of possibly the U.S. Moving towards creating a political office for anti-Taliban Afghans, so that there could be an alternative arrangement for all of the Afghans and women of Afghanistan to come together to deliberate about what could be the path forward for a legitimate governance in Afghanistan. That could also facilitate the necessary ground for having a government in exile that could then easily be transferred back into Afghanistan when Afghanistan is free. What are you hearing, and what is your prediction, and at the end, what is your recommendation for the US and Western world on what type of policy they need to adopt towards Afghans in their countries as well as towards Afghanistan?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of things, but I make recommendations and I make a strategic when, when recommendations. When for the Trump administration, and especially for President Trump, and I'll directly talk to him, Mr. President, you want to leave behind a legacy of peace, and you do deserve a Nobel Peace Prize, provided that you help end a 5-decade-long conflict for moral and strategic national security reasons. And no one knows this better than your former national security advisor, and now, hopefully soon, your ambassador to the United Nations, Michael Waltz, who fought in Afghanistan. He saw the suffering of people, and he saw American soldiers bleeding and losing limbs, none of which one go in vain. And your statement delivered on your behalf, on behalf of your administration, is a major opportunity. And for the first time, it has given the Afghan people hope because unfortunately, you decided to um, launch the Doha peace process, which was not a peace process, was a deal which your predecessor continued and working with the envoy that you appointed, Ambassador Khalizad, to effectively hand over Afghanistan and the bases and so much else, American NATO equipment, to the Taliban, which by no means, strategically speaking, or in terms of values, share anything in common with the United States and the rest of the world or the region, which I just discussed. So, Mr. President, you have an opportunity to work within the P5, the permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council, where at least if you have differences with the hostile competitive members on other issues on Afghanistan, there is potential consensus. A stable, peaceful Afghanistan with a representative government is in favor of regional stability, international peace and security under United Nations Charter, and directly contributes to the U.S. Homeland Security. Only the U.S. has the means and the resources and the convening power, so to speak, um, bilaterally, multilaterally, under the United Nations auspices to resume an effective, results-driven conflict resolution or peace process where you help through the United Nations bring all Afghan sides, including reconcilable Taliban, to reach a sustainable political settlement whose end result is the formation of a legitimate and inclusive representative government, one that would work regionally, maintain close historical ties and friendship with the United States, with over 1 million Americans having served in Afghanistan, and befriending the Afghan people and daily demanding the protection of Afghan refugees in the United States, and as well as enduring commitment to Afghanistan's stabilization. And so this is a win-win-win, and the United States can easily take on this by delivering on the strong statement that your representative delivered at the UN General Assembly. Not just leave it at the talk, but walk the talk. And this is what the Afghan people hope would happen. And if the United States, takes on the leadership of this, we are confident that Europeans and other allies would support this, given their history with the Afghan people and the fact they did also spend blood and treasure in Afghanistan, and that there's also regional buy-in. The situation in the region has changed. That's why Iran is deporting Afghans. Spillover effects. Or Pakistan is not deporting Afghans, but also are concerned about the growing terrorist threats, and so is Russia. Russia's pragmatic step is more about buying influence, but it could definitely brought on board if they saw really a meaningful peace process that is win-win-win. And I think the only country that they can do this is the United States. Any other half measures, um, not about Afghan people, but about your own issues or other countries pursuing the same kind of half measures about their own issues, somehow harnessing Afghans here and there, providing them with some means to create an office or a group or a conference or this and that wouldn't help because it's not about Afghans, it's not about the future of Afghanistan, it's not about a win-win-win peace process, it's about you all. So that's how I see it, Mr. Amini.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
and then that's what Afghans should really advocate for and lobby for to bring the hostile, competitive geopolitical players together under P5 and the broader Security Council, and then having them, encouraging them to basically draw on the provisions of many Security Council resolutions. We are not short of Security Council resolutions or even General Assembly resolutions. As much as rejected by the United States, the General Assembly resolution has a lot of provisions, no conditions or conditionality, so to speak, as the Security Council Resolution 2721 of November 2023 called for. That's one that the a US-sponsored, UN-led peace process should consider and build upon, A, by holding the responsibility of the pen holdership on Afghanistan within the Security Council, B, by appointing a presidential special envoy for Afghanistan, who would then encourage the Secretariat and work within P5 and the Burma Security Council to have the secretary's a special envoy appointed so that the two envoys work collaboratively and multilaterally to move this conflict resolution peace process forward to the end state, which is to form a legitimate, inclusive government that serves the Afghan people, works with the region, and partners with the West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Those are great ideals, I think. But the reality on the ground indicates that that what we are wishing for would probably not happen because of the following reasons. First of all, we did have a special envoy, presidential envoy from the United States that was working with all of the regional countries to achieve the goal that you indicated of everybody agreeing on an inclusive of governance that could be legitimate, that everybody could agree on. But the neighboring countries, the regional countries, were never sincere in that process, and they were never willing, even though that they were participating in those meetings with the U.S. and Western delegations, but they were never sincere because they wanted the U.S. and Western countries to be out of the region at any cost, even at the cost of the Taliban coming back and taking power. And they did achieve that objective. And so, given the fact that in the past 4 years, they did have an opportunity to all of these major countries to come together and bring about a proposal of way out of the current situation, so that the Western world could take part. Even the Western world were supporting all of the financial aspects, the governance structure, the monetary structure. Everything was and is still under control of the Western countries, that is able to maintain the governance structure within Afghanistan. But the neighboring countries, regional countries, never came up with a strategy. And so it, I think, is increasingly becoming evident to all of the Western world. And I hope that Afghans also open up their eyes, wake up to the reality on the ground that the neighboring countries, the regimes in the neighborhood, not the nations, but the regimes in charge, they are only looking at Afghanistan as a ploy, as a battleground in their competition with the West. That
So
their
that's what I'm
primary
saying. That's why
objective is
I'm
to make
proposing.
sure,
That's
Mr.
why I'm
Ambassador,
proposing
to finish
a
my thought,
win-win-win.
I'll give you an opportunity
Sure.
that the Western countries should never come back to Afghanistan with the level of influence that they had in the past, and they are never willing to have Afghans who are Western allies of the West to be having an open hand in the governance in Afghanistan. That those are the conditions of the neighboring countries, and also they would like to utilize the terrorist structure that is right now in place in Afghanistan against the Western countries. And I think that realization in the West has made them halt all of the engagements and all of the support that they're providing to the current governance in Afghanistan. And soon they will adopt policies that will lead to the collapse of the Taliban in Afghanistan. And so Afghans need to be ready to work with the free world, with the Western world, the same way that we worked with them during the communist time. When the communist regime was in charge, the Soviet Union never spoke with Americans, and they were never sincere to address the issue because they had their puppet regime in Afghanistan. And right now they do have their puppet regime, and the recognition of the Russian state of the Taliban is an indication that there is no negotiation, because once you recognize a government in Afghanistan, then what are you going to negotiate over? Unless the Russians take back their recognition, And the Chinese and Iranians and Pakistanis, they threw out all of the Taliban ambassadors back to Afghanistan, and then there could be a formulation. That's a very idealistic scenario. I think what we need to be ready as Afghans is that we need to be willing to work with the Western world and any of the neighboring countries that is willing to work with the Western world to free Afghanistan from the Taliban and from their masters in the region. If they are not willing to speak and negotiate, and they did not show any willingness in the past 4 years to negotiate with us, and in the past 20 years to negotiate with us, we shouldn't pin our hopes to something that is not going to happen, to something that is unrealistic. Please go ahead.
No, I think your points are well taken, but what I'm saying is that it's going to be more of the same. That if we side with, the neighbors against the West and vice versa, it wouldn't help. We've seen that movie before. That's why there's a two-level peace process, so to speak. One is consensus building among P5, and the consensus is there, more or less. Here, it needs leadership to build on that consensus, reach an agreement among themselves, these major powers, hopefully on moral ground, but also on a win-win basis, serving their national security interests. That if Afghanistan were stabilized, were given with their support an inclusive, legitimate government recognized by the Afghan people and by the international community, that should be among them. Build confidence, reach a consensus, and then agree to support a UN-led peace process, serving all sides on a win-win basis. Unless that happens, it's going to be more of the same. If they change that, paradigm of seeing it through a lose-win or lose-lose prism and shift to one of win-win, at least in case of Afghanistan, because this country suffered for the last 5 decades, right at the heart of Asia, which we discussed early on in this discussion is not favoring the region or the world and the United States Homeland Security, then they should build on their consensus, reach an agreement, field the United Nations to utilize its institutional memory to help succeed in Afghanistan. It's possible. Those Taliban that are reconcilable, you know, they come forward and help form a government. Those that are not, we saw how the 12-day war unfolded, and they can be easy targets by a multinational force, including the neighbors of Afghanistan. That has not, unfortunately, happened. That's what the Afghan people should advocate, because if we advocate one side or the other at the end of the day, and they try to do something, they will take sides, more of the same. They would torpedo each other's initiatives. They will not participate. They will veto it within P5 or on the ground. We saw for 20 years how China indirectly, Russia indirectly, sometimes directly supported the Taliban. Iran and Pakistan were very much directly supporting the Taliban to destabilize the country. That's what they would do, and that's what I delivered at the table in Moscow. That's your failure that you were complaining about why the West is in Afghanistan, but they've left and they're not interested. They're going to leave. What do you do? What have you done? How much financially you've provided to the Afghan people? How many roads? How many bridges? How many infrastructure projects you've rebuilt or built in Afghanistan? None. So unfortunately, more of the same with the United States just sitting on the sidelines and rejecting or maintaining silence or somehow indirectly working with the Taliban to buy influence with the region doing the same, containing the problems, sitting on the sidelines, recognizing, pragmatically approaching, etc. Or the Afghan so-called leadership failed, missing, broken, divided, on and off, showing up here and there, making certain statements, running around to attend conferences when they feel sense, some hope of going back to Afghanistan and claiming some, you know, piece of power. This shouldn't be the way forward. The leaders, true leaders, including you, you know, we have now 3, 4 generations that have nothing to do with the politics, but they want Afghanistan to move forward on its own with the region, with the rest of the world, and as well as the West. This is what they, I think, should advocate. At least that should be the end state. That should be the end goal because we're such geopolitically and strategically cursed or geographically cursed and located, unfortunately, that these countries would continue competing. And our responsibility is really to wean Afghanistan of this, geopolitical hostilities and lose win competitions and bring them together as much as we can. At least we should talk about it. Where they listen to us, that's another issue. But knowing that it's their shared long-term best interest to collaborate, to cooperate on Afghanistan, at least within P5, the broader Security Council, given their moral obligations and as well as treaty obligations and the suffering of the Afghan people.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I believe that the way forward for Afghanistan is making sure that our neighborhood is democratized, as well as having an Afghanistan that's democracy. We cannot survive in that region being a democracy, being surrounded by authoritarian regimes. So I believe that our solution to what we're looking at, a regional framework, if the countries in the neighborhood are all democracies, I don't think there will be any conflict between the West and the East. The problem fundamentally lies with the nature of the regimes that are in charge of billions of people in our neighborhood who does not represent the will of their own people. And so when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to their dealing with the United States, when it comes to their dealing with the world, they're all also not representing the interest of the world and the interest of the region. So I think we need to be realistic of what is in front of us. What is in front of us is dictatorial authoritarian regimes that facilitated the establishment of authoritarian terrorist regime in Afghanistan. And for us to get rid of that and to be able to move towards a future where we have liberty and democracy like the West, we need to work with the West. And any country in the neighborhood, if they are willing to work with the West and willing to work with free democratic Afghans, we need to work with them. And any country that does not work with democratic Afghans and is working with anti-democratic Afghans, with terrorist Afghans, we should really cut off our ties. We shouldn't engage. It's a waste of time. And it's undermining the efforts of Afghans as well as the efforts of the West, and also undermines the trust in moving forward. So I hope Afghans who are listening, they need to understand where we're moving forward. We need to be on a trust basis, and the trust needs to be among those who believe in certain principles. And the principle of having the people of Afghanistan decide what type of governance they want, what type of leadership they want, what type of laws they want. Any country that supports that is our friend and ally, and we need to work with them. And any country that does not want that, they're not our friends, they're not our ally, and we need to work with other countries to reform those regimes, to change those regimes as much as we can. That is for our interest, rather than compromising with those regimes. Compromising did not serve us in the past 20 years, and it will never serve us in the future. Thank you
No,
very much, Ambassador. We'll continue this conversation. There's a lot that we can talk about this.
yeah,
But
just two words, Mr. Amini. So here I think we would have to agree to disagree because I'm not really, as an Afghan, concerned about the types of regime and power in the region. We don't care. We shouldn't care. If they can extend their pragmatism to terrorism, they can extend their pragmatism to democracy. Our democracy is culturally, nationally rooted. It's not superimposed from outside. And that's why I've always rejected that it was the West which superimposed democracy on Afghanistan. So no, I explained the nature of mountainous peoples. So we are democratic, egalitarian people. We want democracy as a form of our government, but we really don't expect to impose it on our neighbors. It's up to them, their peoples. But what do we do expect, in their own favor and their own in favor of regional stability and global peace and international security, is that they respect the will of the Afghan people on the form of the government they pursue. As long as we are democratic, we maintain or when independent, sovereign ties with them, where it doesn't harm them but benefits them, and where we do
well, that's
not
what we did,
interfere.
Mr. Ambassador, in the past 20
We,
years. We didn't try to reform their regimes, but they did. So it's not something what we want and what type of positions we need to have, they naturally, inherently do not want a democratic
Because
Afghanistan.
they felt that's what is happening. That what was happening in Afghanistan was a Western agenda, which was trying to not, of course,
And that's
democratize
untrue.
Afghanistan, but
That's untrue, Mr. Ambassador.
yeah, that's why
Yeah,
we
so
need to.
we cannot change the mentality. We need to change the regime. We need to work with the Western countries. We should have worked in the past 20 years to change the regime in Iran, change the regime in Russia, change the regime in China. We would have survived. At least
That's
we would
not
have
our
made an
business.
attempt
That's
to
not our
survive.
business. Our business is
We
the
couldn't
long-term
survive with that business,
security,
Mr. Ambassador.
stability of
We did
Afghanistan
not survive
on a
with that
win-win
approach.
basis,
We
where
did
we
not
can
survive with that
convince.
approach. We lost our democracy.
Mm.
Didn't we
I
lose
don't
our
believe
democracy
that
with that
because some
approach?
of those countries, authoritarian regimes, actually do have working relationship with democracies.
But
I mean,
we lost,
look at
and we're talking
China.
about
Look at China
Afghanistan.
closely
We're
working with
talking, Mr.
Europe.
Ambassador, we're talking
Right
about
now,
Afghanistan.
Europe is very much
Our
working with
leadership tried to
China.
develop ties with Iranians, with Chinese, with Russians. That did not serve us well.
That did not, but that's because that was the perception. We need to educate them. We need to let them know pragmatically, concretely, that if they work with the West to address at least their differences on Afghanistan, and for moral and national security interests, if they agreed on a win-win-win, then it's good for Afghanistan.
That would be
Other
great.
than that, unfortunately, if we side with the neighborhood competing with the West, then we would definitely face, unfortunately, interference and steps that wouldn't be helpful to the Afghan people. I care about this nation who have suffered for 5 decades, and they should no longer be ripped apart in these geopolitical games and shifts and ongoing rivalries that happen across the world. But at least our demand should be from all of them a break. A break. You go get compete elsewhere, but not in Afghanistan because these people have suffered too much. If you continue more of the same, it will come back and haunt you, just like it did on 9/11. So I think the new conservative agenda is something that's not going to help Afghanistan, and if it had, it would have worked out. It didn't really deliver on the promise that these people make to themselves here in Washington, but they neither, succeeded in Afghanistan, nor in Iraq, nor elsewhere. So the agenda, also, I speak as an American that is not helping, America's core national security interest, regardless of partisanship, is to really pick on a goal, work multilaterally, bilaterally, and get it to success. And once that sustainable success has been achieved, the friendship of that nation and government and people, maybe on and off here and there, some glitches would be assured. So the American people invested in Afghanistan. The friendship is deepened. It's there now. We have a large diaspora here in the United States with the skills, with education that could go back. They have roots, they have families, relatives, help jumpstart a government that will work regionally and globally on a one-win basis where everyone respects based on that consensual agreement among major powers to just stay out of interfering in Afghanistan and collaborating with one another when it comes to ensuring peace and sustainable peace in Afghanistan.
And with that, we'll conclude our interview. It was a pleasure speaking with you and debating you on the policies of the different countries involved related to Afghanistan and the circumstances that we are in, and various approaches that the people of Afghanistan could adopt moving forward. Hopefully, soon Afghanistan will be free. Afghanistan will be a place where all Afghans could return to their homeland, and where women could be free and have an equal share in power and riches, and be able to enjoy their lives. And the people of Afghanistan would be the owners of their country and their land. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Glad to have you and wish you all the best with the efforts that you're doing on Displaced International and all of the advocacies that you're doing on negotiation, on peace building, and regional consensus, international consensus. I wish you all the best, and hopefully your track will succeed, that will benefit the whole humanity. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
God bless you. God bless Afghanistan. God bless the United States, and God bless our world. Thank you.
Thank you.